Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. For this week's project, I've decided to pull out my Decadent Pies palette again, and I'm going to work with three colors in particular. One is called Blackberry, the other one is Blueberry, and then Key Lime. And the reason I wanted to work with this palette is because one of my very favorite colors is green. Now, I'm not working with just green in this painting because, unfortunately, although green is a beautiful color and it's my favorite color because it reminds me of nature, it's a little bit of an overpowering color. And if my painting were mostly covered with green, I don't think it would be as impactful as I'd like it to be. But blue is a beautiful color to complement green, and so I'll be working with these three colors this week. I want to keep my process relatively simple, and I also want to use my process as sort of a learning opportunity. And for this reason, I'll be practicing certain techniques. For instance, like using salt with my paper and applying the salt in the different layers of my painting. But before I start adding some salt on the surface of my paper, I want to apply a first layer of color. And I'm working wet on wet, which means that I'm not letting the colors that I apply dry before I apply my new colors. And in this case, because blues and greens work well together, there's no real concern for me to work in this way. And in fact, I love working in this way when the colors blend well together because it can create some really interesting effects. And when the blue and the green meet, they can create a nice darker green, which I also really like. And in this painting, that will work really well. I tend to work with this watercolor palette quite a bit. It's got many colors in it that I really love, and I find that they blend really well together as well. The green in this palette, the one that's called Key Lime, is very reminiscent for me of green gold. So it's got some earthiness to it. It's a little bit bright, and I also like that there's some yellow to it, but it's not a color that tends to turn more towards yellow. It still maintains that beautiful green shade that I like, and I find that it works really well with blueberry, and it definitely works well also with the blackberry. So I'm excited to create this painting because green is my favorite color, and I don't work with it very often because, of course, it's, like I said, it can be a little bit of an overpowering color. It's not a color that tends to take the main stage super well in paintings. At least I haven't found a way to make it such, not yet anyway. But it is a very nice accent color. And so that's going to be what I'm going to try to do here is to work with this blue and the green to create something that's, I don't really know what it's going to be, to be honest. I'm thinking there might be some elements of neurographic art in this one. It's an intuitive painting. For sure, it's an intuitive painting. I have no plan. I'm just kind of using the colors that are in this palette. They are the ones that sort of worked as the inspiration for this painting, but there's no real set plan for what I'm going to do with this painting. I'm just kind of going to go with the flow and see what it is I want to create. At this point, my paper is still wet, but it's not sopping wet. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to add some salt, just some fine-grained table salt, to a few areas in the painting before I stop and let it dry. When it comes to working with salt and watercolors, there are a few factors that come into play that will determine the types of effects you'll have. The quality of the paper is definitely one factor to keep in mind because different types of paper will not react the same way to the salt. And the other thing to keep in mind is when you add the salt. If you added when your paper is more wet, you'll have different effects than if you added when your paper is slightly more dry. And you'll have even fewer effects when your paper is even more dry. So I always recommend experimenting with it just to see how your paper reacts. And if you can, to work with different types of paper to also see what different types of effects you can create just by changing your paper. Often, but not always, once my first layer of paint has dried, I like to come in and intensify my colors. Watercolors tend to dry lighter than they are when they're first applied, and I have a tendency to love working with brighter colors. So if I come in after my first layer is dry and apply a new layer of paint, it tends to make my colors more vibrant, and I like that. I am also at this point covering some of those textures that I created. Now, because watercolors are transparent, I'm not going to completely cover the textures that were created. And it's going to add a little bit of interest, I guess, some more interest in the painting to put a little bit more color over those textures. But I am being very mindful of not applying my layers of paint with too much pigment, because the more pigment I add, of course, the more I will cover the surface, and then I will hide some of those textures that I've created. In my first layer of paint, I had added the salt to the green sections of the painting. And now, having come back in and added some more pigment to my paper, I'm now going in with my salt and I'm adding it over the sections where there's blue. Because there's already a layer of paint underneath this second layer that I just added, the textures that will be created will be a little bit more subtle and different than the first textures that were created using the salt on the first layer. Before starting to work with my fountain pens and markers, it's important to make sure that my paper is completely dry, of course, and that I've wiped off the salt that I had added to the paper. And when I come in with my fountain pen, I am basically trying to keep things as simple as possible. I'm looking at the background that I created with the paint and the salt, and I'm looking for textures and marks that I find interesting, and then I draw a line and some circles around those areas that in the painting that I want to draw attention to. The textures left by the salt and the paint are really quite beautiful, and it's fun to be able to draw attention to those textures by doing something as simple as just drawing little circles around them. And as I'm doing this, I'm not only going to add these little squiggly lines and circles or circular shapes, I'm going to come in at one point also and I'm going to use my fountain pen to color in the areas in between the shapes, and that's going to make them even more prominent, I guess, in the painting, and draw even more attention to the textures that were left in the background. There really is no rhyme or reason to how many shapes I actually create in a painting. It's just all decided intuitively. I look at the painting and see what my gut tells me I want to do next. In this case, I created quite a few shapes, and some paintings I create much less. So it's really a matter of personal taste, I guess. And for me, depending on what my mood is and how I'm feeling when I'm working through the painting, sometimes it's also about how much I want to get involved with my painting. And the thing I'm doing right now, which is coloring in between my shapes and sort of rounding off little areas of the painting where there are like pointy corners, that part of the painting process for me, which reminds me of neurographic art, is very relaxing. And so if I feel like I need a little bit more time for me to just be in this moment, doing something super simple and uncomplicated, then I create more shapes, because of course it's going to take a little bit more time to do that coloring process. It's as simple as that. It's really, when it comes to creating, especially when I'm painting intuitively, I don't want to make things complicated. I want to keep things as simple as possible so that I can keep my process relaxing and mindful. When I get stuck overthinking a part of my painting process, then it's less mindful and it's more, I don't know if stressful is the right word, but it definitely is a lot more intellectual, if you will. I have to sort of analyze what it is I'm doing and what I want to do next. And for me, that's not very relaxing. Whereas if I can just paint or color in a way that's very simple, that doesn't involve a whole lot of thought or analytical thinking, I guess, then I feel more relaxed because I'm just really sitting with what's in front of me. I am not trying to attach any desires to what I hope the outcome of my painting will be. I'm just focused on what I'm doing in this here moment. And being in this here moment, coloring in this painting or these little areas of the painting is very relaxing. I guess I can't really I can't stress that enough. It's a mindful practice, and that's the thing, is mindfulness. When you are brought into the present moment, focusing entirely on what it is that you're doing, there's less anxiety and less pressure, I guess. Anyway, it's a process that I really, really enjoy, and so I tend to do it a lot in most of my paintings. Sometimes I get so caught up in what I'm doing that I actually lose track of time and lose track of what's going on with my camera. And in this case, that's what happened. I forgot to hit record, I guess, or I guess I had stopped recording and forgot to hit record again before adding my lines. So I was working on the painting vertically, and the more I looked at it, it didn't feel like it was the right angle. So I decided to flip my painting horizontally, and I liked it much better. And once I did that, that's when I made the decision to add those vertical lines that you can see. And in order to make my shapes in the center of the painting stand out more, I also decided at this point to add some stippling around them using my black fountain pen. Stippling is such a cool little technique. By just adding a few little dots around these shapes, I'm giving them dimension. I'm giving the shapes more dimension, and it's almost giving the painting an element of three-dimensionality, because it makes the shapes in the center of the painting pop out a little bit more. And this is just done with a little bit of dotting around the shapes. It's it's kind of mind-blowing to me when I'm doing this how much it changes the painting. And so I guess it's not surprising why I enjoy doing stippling so much. For the vertical lines that I had added underneath my stippling that I didn't get to film, I used my Sharpie Roller. It's got a 0.5 tip, and I really like it. It's a pen that sort of was a discovery I made when I couldn't find another 0.25 tip pen to purchase. But the pen I'm using right now is that extra fine tip 0.25 pen, and I thought it'd be interesting to include not only vertical lines created with the 0.5 tip because it's finer, but then to use an extra fine tip to create the lines that I'm doing right now, I think adds a little bit of interest also, because the lines, being that I'm using a finer tip pen, are a little bit more subtle, yet I am recreating some of the visual elements that I created on the bottom portion of my painting with the longer lines. So it's just nice to vary our tools when we're working, to not always be working with the same tools, because if we create marks that are of different thickness or that vary, it makes the painting that much more interesting. At this point, I'm feeling like I'm done working with my black ink, and I'm going to start adding some white elements to my painting. And to do this, I'm going to use my EcoTwizby refillable pen. It's a pen that I just started working with not too long ago, and I really love it. I especially love the fact that it is refillable. So instead of going through a lot of gel pens that I really love also, but I tend to go through them pretty quickly because I use a lot of white ink in my paintings. And I kind of wasn't really feeling all that good about throwing out so many plastic ink cartridges or pen cartridges that I couldn't refill. So a friend that I connected with here on YouTube had recommended this EcoTwizby pen, and I bought it, and I will say I am actually very impressed with it. It works super well. I use my pen quite a bit, and the ink flows from it extremely well. It hasn't clogged on me yet, and so I like that. I just really especially love the fact that I can refill it. So I'm not going to be throwing out, a lot of pens. And I do try to be as environmentally conscious as possible. I love Mother Earth, and I want to do my part in keeping her healthy and well. So hopefully this is one little way that I can do that. And now for the star of the show. Well, I suppose green was supposed to be the star of this show because I said it's my favorite color, and it really is my favorite color. But when it comes to iridescent paints, Star Gold is definitely my top choice. And for this painting in particular, I feel like it's going to work so well with those blues and that green in the background. And so I had thought of maybe using my magic green, but really Star Gold was really calling my name. So I felt like it was, for me, the best way to go. But then I added those little dots, and I liked them. I didn't love them. So instead of doing these little dots inside my rounded shapes, I have decided to just paint solid, some of the shapes with solid gold. And I like this way better. Every once in a while, I also like to use my brush to add some little paint splatters on my paper. And it's such an easy thing to do. You just have to make sure that there's a fair amount of water in your paint palette. Then you put some of the paint on your brush and you just tap the brush against your finger and it leaves these little, I don't know the word. Oh geez, menopause. You're killing me. It leaves these little splatters. Like, I guess the only word that's coming to mind right now is inconsistent, but it's they're kind of sporadic, much better word. So little sporadic paint splatters, and I think this adds a little bit of interest, a little bit of contrast in a very subtle way, but in a fun and easy way. All right, it's now time for me to pull the tape off the paper and move in a little bit closer to see all those neat little details in the painting. I'm really quite happy that I decided to turn my portrait painting into a landscape painting. Landscape meaning, horizontal versus vertical. I think it works way better than it did when it was in portrait mode, and I love how all the details came together. Aren't those textures left by the salt just the coolest? I really love that effect, and I guess that's why I use it a lot in a lot of my paintings, because it's an easy way for me to paint intuitively. The salt does its thing, and if I just choose to let go, I'll have some really interesting and cool textures to work with. What are some of the ways you like to create textures in your paintings? Let me know your thoughts on this painting and the process in the comments section down below. I always love hearing from you, and it's really a highlight of my week to connect with you all. As this little painting project comes to an end, I want to say a great big thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!